Several major developments this week in the saga of Mica Francis Miller. The death of a key witness, an investigation into a former suspicious death reopened, and some big moves on the legal front as Pastor John Paul Miller, husband of the late worship leader Mica Francis Miller, seeks to reclaim the initiative in his case. We're going to walk you through all those details. Also, an ear-eating cannibal in South Carolina. We're going to tell you the story about a Department of Mental Health scandal in the making. And last but not least, our Andy Fancher has been kicking ass and taking names. We're going to walk you through his big week in exposing badges gone bad here in South Carolina. I am Will Folks, founding editor of FITSNews.com, your host for the Week in Review. Welcome back to the FITSNews studios. Let's dive in. All right, so we're starting this week with another death tied to the saga of Mica Francis Miller, which ironically began with a suspicious death, the death of Mica Francis Miller. Now, when FITSNews first reported this last spring, it sparked an international outpouring of sympathy for Mica's family, but it also sparked a movement for reforming South Carolina's domestic violence laws. Perhaps most significantly, though, for our purposes, it's been a mystery, and it sparked all sorts of speculation about what really happened to this aspiring missionary and worship leader from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I am joined by Jen Wood, our research director, and Callie Lyons, one of our top researchers and reporters. Jen, you and Callie have been focused on this case from the very beginning. And this week, we saw several major developments in the Mica Miller saga, but there's one in particular I want to start off with, a death involving someone who perhaps is more integrally connected to Mica's final moments than anybody else. Jen, walk us through real quick what happened.
So over the weekend, one of the key witnesses to Mica Miller's death in the Lumber River State Park on April 27th of last year died in a two-car accident up in North Carolina. So it was shocking. He was kind of a controversial figure. Kelly can give us a little more detail on that. But, given the amount of mystery surrounding all things with this case, it got people talking. And it is sad. Johnny Jacobs, the fisherman.
Yeah, Callie, tell us, who is this guy? Where did he die? What happened? And what are the questions that are being asked right now?
Well, 56-year-old Johnny Jacobs was 2 miles from home when he died at a rural crossroads. He was struck by another driver who ran a stop sign. That driver was trapped and then airlifted to Florence Hospital. And of course, Johnny Jacobs was pronounced dead at the scene. He was the fisherman, as we know him, one of two witnesses who was at the park at Lumber River State Park on the day that Mica Francis died. And in particular, he's the person that ended up with her belongings. He said he found them on the riverbank, not far from where her body was found.
Yeah, and this is the guy he said he heard crying, and then a gunshot, and then the crying stopped, and then apparently saw three people in a boat, asked them, did you hear the gunshot? They said, yeah. Did you hear the crying? They said, no. But traced those sounds to a opening in the river by a forest off to the side there at the Lumber River State Park. And that's where, about 2 feet off of the water's edge, he found Mica's belongings, a small pack with, her license, with her phone, her purse, with her Bible, obviously very close to her heart there in those last moments. But just an odd situation. This is a guy, Callie and Jen, both of you can address this. He'd been under some scrutiny. Some folks had been challenging his version of events, challenging his credibility, but also a few people were even going way out on a limb, I guess, and suggesting maybe this guy had something to do with it. Is that an accurate take, Jen?
Yeah, his story, he has spoken to a number of reporters and content creators, and his story has varied quite a bit. And his initial story was a little bizarre to me. He found, heard this gunshot, found this bag, and, he investigated. And he takes the bag and he drives to get a pack of cigarettes and comes back, and the whole thing was bizarre.
Kelly, this guy's been under scrutiny for some time, correct?
Yes, he has. That changing narrative really drew a lot of controversy from the public. And it's hard to know whether that was the pressure of being under a national spotlight or whether that was something, something else,
Yeah,
something more
nefarious,
deceptive.
something,
Yes.
yeah, something worthy of scrutiny. We've actually got a clip. One of our friends, Millie Joy, in Myrtle Beach, pastor, runs a church there with her husband Rob. She's been following this case probably even closer than we have. But Millie had some thoughts on it. She posted to her social media, which is a very widely watched account as it relates to the John Paul Miller saga and the quest for justice for Mica. She's been very involved in that movement. Let's hear what Millie had to say about the death of Johnny Jacobs. Let's cut to this clip real quick.
So let me get this straight. If we take one of the most suspicious parts of the story regarding Micah Francis and her passing, and they're suddenly omitted from the picture via a vehicle accident, on back roads where there is no obstruction of the stop sign, that flew through to hit a vehicle that contained the only or one of the only supposed witnesses the day that Micah Francis was no longer with us on the earth, April 27th, 2024. And if we take into consideration the fact that this man, that his story changed, that when we talked about him, he followed Rob and I, or someone did, in his name. He followed all of our accounts, including our ministry account. That he did more interviews than John Paul himself, supposedly. That according to a story by Robbie Harvey, and I'll get to him, that he burned, what, $1,300? And if I question any of this, it's insensitive, it's hurtful to the family, it's hurtful to people's feelings. Feelings don't run the show. And I have respect for people's families, absolutely. But if my family member were involved in something like this, I'd want to know the answers. And if there was any possibility that there was foul play, I'd want questions asked.
Callie, I want to start with you and then go to Jen. Is this scrutiny on this guy warranted?
Unfortunately, we may never know. There are details of the story that only Johnny Jacobs knew, and now those are lost to us.
Yeah. Jen, what do you think?
I agree with Callie 100%. I don't know. It is disappointing that, and sad that this happened because I do think he had a lot of information that was vital to learning the truth behind what happened on April 27th. And like she said, we now all we have are, fortunately, he did speak to the media. So we do have these varying, accounts. But in terms of, if this were to ever go to trial or, investigators needed to ask him anything, we don't have Johnny Jacobs anymore as a
Yeah.
witness.
No, it's significant. The thing I kept thinking is even if this guy's story had been rock solid, even if there were no inconsistencies, um, and even if his death had been, a little less suspicious, it would still be sketchy given the context of this story. And I did want to point out, Cal, you reported on this, the driver that struck him, Winston Charles James, 54 years old. He has been charged in connection with this. But that raises an interesting point because I've obviously never thought or planned to kill anyone with a vehicle. I assumed it would be incredibly difficult. I assumed that something like this had to be a random accident because it would just be impossible to pull something like this off if you had an intention to kill someone in this way. But apparently, I was wrong. It's apparently easier than it looks. So again, I'm obviously not a pro driver or anything like that, but we're just continuing to dig into Mr. James' background. Callie, you've already started on that, and I know that we are uncovering a few things that we'll probably get into in our future coverage on FITSNews. But I want to move on because we got so much to cover on the Miller saga this week. And one of the big developments, Jen Wood, you exclusively reported this week that an investigation into another suspicious death tied to this, again, this just incredible, still unfolding story, that investigation has been reopened. Originally, the death of Christopher Skinner, who is the late husband of John Paul Miller's alleged new girlfriend. I guess, is that what we're calling her? What do we call Susie Skinner, Jen?
You know what? I think I don't think he is. I don't think it's alleged new girlfriend. I think they've been dating for some time.
But she's denied it. She said, "I'm not his girlfriend." Is that correct?
Right, right.
All right. But we don't buy
So,
that.
not really.
Callie's laughing. Callie, what do you think? Is this his squeeze or no? I mean, what's the deal
Oh,
with these
yeah.
two?
The other day on the stand, he asked her, "Are you my girlfriend?" And she said yes. So I guess it's on the record now.
Wow. Okay. Well, the death of Chris Skinner, again, very suspicious circumstances. Skinner, a quadriplegic who ended up at the bottom of a community pool in Myrtle Beach. Was he pushed in? Did he deliberately uh, move his chair into the pool? We don't know. But Jen, walk us through what you've learned over the last few days about the investigation into Chris Skinner's death.
Sure. So Chris Skinner, as you said, was a quadriplegic, and he had a motorized wheelchair. It was, a very costly one, high-tech one that allowed him to go on the beach. And he went on September 6, 2021, went down to the pool in their apartment community, asked a neighbor to open the gate for him because he was meeting someone to play chess in the morning. And he was found not long after at the bottom of the pool, trapped under his wheelchair.
Oh,
So
wow.
the investigation pulled surveillance video, and the investigative report from Myrtle Beach Police indicated that he had, circled the pool, and then suddenly his wheelchair abruptly went into the water. So the investigation originally deemed his death an accident. But according to our sources, that investigation has been reopened by Myrtle Beach Police.
Wow.
So it'll be very interesting where this leads. The reports are, we saw this in Allison Miller's affidavit, is prior to Chris Skinner's death, Susie and John Paul Miller were allegedly having an affair. And in the weeks before his death, we've heard that Chris confronted John Paul about that affair, and he suddenly ended up dead in in a body of water.
Yeah, I remember that, Jen. I remember probably the biggest story that we broke, other than obviously the death of Mica Miller. I think one of the biggest stories we broke was your story last year about that court filing from John Paul Miller's first wife, which brought this allegation up. And I think that was the first time all of us started looking at the death of Chris Skinner in a different light, saying, wait a minute. And now we've got the fisherman is dead. This is a lot of suspicious deaths revolving around John Paul Miller. Callie, at what point do we start saying, okay, maybe these aren't coincidences?
I think it's a little, at this point in the story, does anyone believe in coincidence anymore? That is a tough pill to swallow at this point. Now, we know that some of the deaths that have been suspicious and related to this case were simply, they're not nefarious. Deidre Collins, for example, who unfortunately took her own life. Coincidentally, the very day that John Paul Miller's home was raided by the FBI. So
Yeah.
it makes it look very much connected, but at the end of the day, it really wasn't.
Yeah, it was just in close proximity to his home. And there
Yeah.
were, the raid and then the investigation into her body being found in the vehicle. Yeah, everybody's like, what? How is this possible? How could this happen at the exact same time? But, Kelly did a lot of digging on that, and that was a coincidence.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that federal investigation, Kelly. That gives us an opportunity to kind of pull the lens back. And I think we've mentioned this often, but in the aftermath of Micah's suspicious suicide, and again, at this point, it's a suicide, and again, we've got no firm evidence disproving that. So we call it what it is at this point, a suspicious suicide. But one of the things that we've talked about consistently that has moved this story, that has continued to breathe life in this story, are the multiple uh, narrative dramas that have unfolded after that. I'm talking, of course, about the federal investigation into John Paul Miller. So far, all we know about it is that it's tied to allegations of interstate domestic violence. There could be other things we don't know. The feds have been very tight-lipped about it, but that's one path. But then there's also been the path of the Justice for Mica movement, of push for Mica's law, which would again address South Carolina's domestic violence statutes and toughen them to criminalize certain coercive control measures. That's what supporters have been pushing for. But the other big part of the saga that has continued to drive headlines has been the civil court side. And we have seen tons of activity on the civil front over the last few months. There have been multiple lawsuits filed against John Paul Miller. There have been multiple lawsuits filed by John Paul Miller. And we saw that again at work this past week. Two of the biggest cases filed against John Paul Miller are filed by Jane Doe 1 and Jane Doe 2. These are cases which allege sexual abuse, institutional cover-up by religious leaders, including John Paul Miller's father, Wayne Miller. So these are lawsuits that are incredibly significant. But this past week, Callie, J.P. Miller suing his alleged victim in this sexual abuse case. Callie, walk us through this lawsuit. What is J.P. Miller suing for? What is he hoping to accomplish? What is he asking the court to do?
Well, John Paul Miller is claiming that the statements made by Jane Doe number 1 in her lawsuit regarding the sexual abuse of a minor are false and defamatory. He wants them removed from the internet. He doesn't want her to speak of it again, and he wants, basically financial payment, a punitive judgment, in compensation for this happening. So it's very John Paul Miller to try to change the narrative. He's done that throughout, right? So it's really not a surprise. I don't think that, as far as the attorney for Jane Doe number 1, he says they're not being intimidated, they're not going to stop, and they're looking forward to their day in court.
Yeah, absolutely. And Callie and Jen, it's just so interesting. Jen, I wanted to ask you about this too, as we think about this story. So many layers to this story, but isn't it ironic that it all started with John Paul Miller trying to control the narrative? And again, I think the story of Mica Miller was going to get out and be told one way or the other. I think there's so much here. There's so much uncertainty. Such a beautiful life snuffed out far too soon. It was going to be told one way or the other. But when he took that pulpit, again, 12 hours after learning, and delivered that sermon where he told the congregation, don't speak about this as you leave, don't talk about it, and tried to sort of frame it, and then wrote this obituary as if they were the happiest couple in the world, when we now know that was an absolute farce. Guys, this guy's been trying to control the narrative from the very beginning. Jen, is it his undoing?
Absolutely. 100% it is his undoing. If he had never taken that pulpit, that Sunday morning, if he had never done that, this may have become a story, but it would not be a story of this magnitude. That video is what sent this into the stratosphere.
Kelly, you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I wonder, if you hadn't made the decision to play the video of that announcement on FITSNews, would we be talking about Mica today? I don't know that we would.
Well, again, I think it would have gotten out one way or the other, but that definitely got it going. And I tell you, I still remember the day that somebody slid in my DMs and said, "Hey, you guys need to look at this. This just happened this weekend in Myrtle Beach." And we published our first story on May the 2nd, I believe. But yeah, it blew up from there like nothing I've ever seen. And in fact, now we've got the Netflix folks. This is going to be a Netflix story, just like the Murdoch saga. Just unbelievable how it has mushroomed into what it is today. I want to change gears here on both of you. And Jen, I know you've been doing a lot of reporting on this next story that we're going to talk about, and it involves somebody from the Murdoch saga. I believe Dick Harpootlian, one of the lawyers on a civil suit against a number of different parties, including South Carolina's Department of Mental Health. But it involves a just horrific killing, a cannibalistic murderer, alleged murder, according to the civil suit and according to the criminal authorities who have charged this individual. But just another South Carolina horror story. Jen Wood, walk us through the report you filed this past week about the ear-eating cannibal in the Midlands region of South Carolina.
This one, I when I first heard of this one, I could not believe it. So I immediately went and pulled the complaint from Richland County Court, the Public Index, and it is filed by Dick Harpootlian as well as Joe McCulloch. So both names we know from the Murdoch saga. And it alleges a 22-year-old young man named Jared Andrea was moved into a residential care home for mental health treatment in Columbia, South Carolina on March 20th, 2023. His family went to pick him up for an appointment one day later and discovered he was missing. Uh, Even worse, no one at the facility even appeared to notice that he was missing. It wasn't until 3 days later, on March 23rd, when staffers finally admitted he'd been gone for days. And instead of alerting law enforcement, the lawsuit says they completely dismissed his disappearance. So after, I'm looking up Jared, and the Columbia Police Department had a missing person flyer out at the time for him. And it wasn't until months later, another resident of the facility, a man named Dashia Butler, also mysteriously vanished. So police were investigating that disappearance, found his decomposing body in a wooded area nearby, and pulled security footage which showed another resident of the home, 27-year-old Mark Anthony Cantrell, dragging Butler's body away, and this led to his arrest. Following his arrest, Cantrell confessed. He told investigators everything that had happened, and it
It's
easily
awful,
it is
chilling stuff.
it's horrible
He
stuff.
drank their blood and like ate their ears. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, it was. It, I've never seen anything like the facts of this case. Apparently, he strangled both of the men. He cut off their ears and ate them because he believed it would give him power. Um, he drank the blood from a coffee cup over a couple of days, and the autopsy confirmed that his ear had been removed. Um, Unfortunately, the first young man, Jared, his body has never been found. So this complaint is accusing the owner of the facility and the South Carolina Department of Mental Health of gross negligence, recklessness, and wrongful death. They're saying that they, allowed this young man to move into this facility without warning him that he could be living under the same roof as a convicted criminal, because the man who killed him had a very long and disturbing criminal history, including he had set his grandmother's house on fire to cover up his murder of the family's dogs.
yeah, and he said he killed those dogs because it felt good.
Yes. So he
Jeez.
was incarcerated, and while he was incarcerated for that crime, had tattoos of devil horns put on his forehead, because he worships Satan. It's just, I mean, it's
That's
just a
sick.
horrible, horrible
Yeah.
case. And I think, the sad thing about this case is it really does show just, the absolute
It's
mess
evil. Yeah,
that the
it's
Department
beautiful.
of Mental Health, there seemed to be no oversight.
Well, and Jen, if you'll permit me, I know there's some folks that in the true crime audience that they don't want me to get political, and
Yeah,
okay, but
yeah,
I want to point something out here because I spent a long time. I was a press secretary for a former governor many years ago, decades ago. A gray beard now, but we spent a lot of time when I was in that administration pushing to give South Carolina a strong executive so that, hey, whether you're Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, you elect a governor, give the governor the authority to do the job, period. You know, whatever your belief system is, you put a guy in office and ask them to do a job, or a woman in office, you put them in the office, ask them to do a job, give them the authority to do the job. So we argued for that forever. Um, didn't make a lot of progress, but I want to point out this is an agency in South Carolina where the governor of the state has total control. He appoints all the members of the Mental Health Commission, who then in turn appoint the director. And I want our audience to know this. Of the 7 members on that board, right now, three are vacant. They've been vacant for years. One of them's on an expired term. So you got a majority of this board that's either vacant or expired, and they're not being appointed. They have had an acting director, not even an interim director. They've had an acting director since 2002. You're right, Jen. It is institutional negligence on the part of the administration here in South Carolina, and incredibly disappointing. Again, as somebody who has fought a long time to give governors power, it's incredibly disheartening to see them fail to exercise it in a situation where, again, we are in a mental health crisis, as
the
we've talked about.
acting director of the Department of Mental Health currently makes $283,000 a year, just FYI.
Oh boy.
Mhm.
Well, Jen, as this case moves forward, I am sure Attorney Dick Harpootlian will not be shy about his approach to this case as he pursues it, and Joe McCulloch also. Those are two guys who certainly have a knack for getting stories out, and so I'm sure we will hear from them as this civil case moves forward. And also, Jen, we're going to be tracking the criminal
The
case,
criminal case as well, yeah.
those murder charges against this Satanist cannibal. So, Jen, please keep us in the loop on that. But I just want to thank both of you, Jen and Callie, for the amazing work you have done this week. I think you guys are kicking the boys' asses on the stats this week. Am I right, Jen? Y'all are.
Just a little bit.
You and Callie are crushing it this week. I love it. I love it. For those of you unfamiliar, FITSNews, we're competitive with other media, but that is nothing compared to how competitive we are with each other. But it's a great thing. And but I can't thank the two of you enough for your work, not only on this story we've been discussing, but most importantly on a very big week in the Mica Miller saga. Callie, you and Jen have done great work on that. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Will.
So when we cover corruption scandals here at FITSNews, we're usually looking at one of two dynamics: money or sex. But when law enforcement are involved or other first responders, there's another dynamic at play: power, as in they have it and can exercise it over you. That's why it's so important to hold those on the thin blue line accountable for their actions. And here at FITSNews, in case you hadn't noticed, we've got somebody who does that on the daily. Andy Fancher, your badge has gone bad, man. It has taken off. And we're going to get into some of the response to it at the end of this segment. But first, you've had another busy week here in the, what do we call it now? The corrupt orchard? There's not bad apples anymore. We got a bad orchard here. But Andy, tell us about this past week, all the stories you broke.
Sure. So we're about to take a trip throughout the Palmetto State because that's where the negligent public servants are. They're everywhere. And until we break this programmed notion that all cops, sheriffs, and government officials are acceptable, this orchard will only continue to get tainted worse and worse and worse until there's no apples left. So while mainstream media tells you about how to navigate this year's Okra Strut promotion, we're going to talk about badges gone bad. And specifically, there was quite a paperweight that was on my desk this week. We've got Avery Richard Smith, former Detention Center Deputy of the Year down there in Berkeley County.
Award winner.
Award winner for exemplary performance, or whatever the inflated words were used to describe him by Sheriff S. Dwayne Lewis. The son of a BCSO deputy accepted a plea deal on Tuesday, 10 years in prison.
Oh, wow.
He was charged with 11 different counts related to the felonious assaults of 9 different women, and his victims range from detainees, including the one who actually lodged the complaint against him that brought and encouraged 8 different women to come forward, including employees.
Wow.
Now, the bad apple metaphor can't be applied here because, according to prosecutors, his behavior was enabled by 2 superiors, specifically former Lieutenant Frankie Snyder, a freaking mall pastor, all right, only the best, as well as former Sergeant Christopher Dozer, who is the brother of a former BCSO deputy as
These
well.
guys were in oversight positions over.
They're in the oversight positions, and in fact, in the probable cause affidavits that accompanied the warrants for their arrest, they noted how at least one of them was joking after witnessing Mr. Smith assaulting a subordinate. Because, that
This is insane. A superior officer making jokes about the sexual assault of detainees?
as well as, according to prosecutors, dismissing some of the complaints filed against Smith.
I see the orchard analogy now, my friend.
But this isn't the only case in recent weeks of law enforcement officers or personnel using detainees as their personal fleshlights, or in the upcoming case, allegedly. Because if we recall, last Wednesday, I attended the bond court hearing of Caleb Hickman Payne, the former Columbia Police Department officer who was accused of pulling his squad car over and assaulting a female detainee who has since sued the Columbia Police Department. Now, I feel that this headline could not have come at a better time because CPD Chief Skip Holbrook was still reeling from the bad press cycle of one of his majors getting popped with a DUI in Myrtle Beach. But I digress. Let's go back to the Low Country in our tour of the South Carolina's finest, because just this week we added a different badge to our Badges Gone Bad
I was about to
franchise.
say, it's not just cops.
No, it's not just cops now. Only in South Carolina can firefighters ruin their reputation as well. Who doesn't love a firefighter?
That's what every kid wants to be when they grow up.
Hell, I certainly looked up
That's
to
what I
them.
wanted to be.
And to their credit, I mean, I still do, but we did obviously add a firefighter to our Badges Gone Bad franchise. The 300-pound Darren Wayne Vaughn of the Low Country, stripped of his rank.
You're fat shaming on the guy.
Well, nonetheless,
Well, I'll tell you what, based on these charges, he probably deserves it. So continue.
allegedly, they're all alleged.
Correct.
But yeah, Darren Wayne Vaughn charged with second-degree criminal sexual conduct with a minor. Now, according to Jasper Fire Chief Russell Wells, who responded to my call almost immediately and who I had a great conversation with, he terminated the 60-year-old upon his immediate notification of the incident.
Mm-hmm.
And now that alleged monster is back in the private sector, along with a nearby ex-cop who, for some reason or another this week, we were provided the psychological evaluation of. Now, I'm nowhere near publishing names or faces related to this case because it's still in its preliminary investigative phase.
Sure.
But what I can say about this court-ordered psychological evaluation of an ex-cop charged with a child sex crime in the Low Country is it's probably the second most alarming thing that I've laid my eyes on in investigating law enforcement with FITSNews. So I am rather pumped about getting that story out. We are working with a host of anonymous sources, as well as on-the-record prosecutors who have actually provided a statement. So that is forthcoming.
No doubt. Andy, we're talking about how these leaders respond to this behavior, because obviously one or two things is going to happen when an officer misbehaves within the system, within that blue line, that fraternity. One or two things is going to happen. Either the leader is going to take appropriate action, hold that guy accountable and send a message to every other officer in that department. This is how we do things. Or they're going to send the other message, aren't they? They're going to
Well,
send a message that, hey,
the other message being no message at all.
right.
I mean, we see these law enforcement officers in South Carolina, the negligent ones, I mean, they're transient. Okay, well, you're allowed to resign over here, so go to Lawrence.
Yeah, they move them around. They play games with the certification. You've been on that too. When these incidents happen, obviously there's a process, but so many times, as you pointed out, that process gets manipulated so that the officers who commit these in admitted or convicted atrocities, or in some cases alleged atrocities, they get to go right back to serving with some other department because of the way that their paperwork gets handled.
Yeah, terminated for reasons not involving misconduct. Now, I have yet to get a call from any representative, and I welcome that. But I mean, there, this is avoidable. Like I said last week, a badge gone bad every once in a while is reprehensible, but multiple badges gone bad every week, including sex crimes, whether it involve children or adults, that's avoidable.
And you exposed that in your Pervert on Patrol series,
Well,
talking about how they manipulated that process so that this guy could get another job despite reprehensible behavior, documented, repeated reprehensible behavior.
Well, I don't know if the folks in Jamestown, where the pervert on patrol absconded to, didn't have internet or what, but yeah, that was inexcusable. Fortunately, we did, after 5 installments of Pervert on Patrol, get him terminated. I don't know how many installments it's going to take to get the admitted drug dealer in Welford off the streets. I don't know how many installments it's going to take to maybe actually effectuate some change in the Palmetto State, but we can at least start by normalizing the
Well,
conversation.
give us the running count. What are we up to now? And you got a list of all the stuff these guys have been charged with over the course of the last.
Sure, because sex crimes, whether it involve children or adults, aren't the only things plaguing our law enforcement officers in this year alone. You're right, and I drafted a running count. So these are just some. These are just some of the charges that we have reported on, in some cases, and in most cases, exclusively lodged against our Palmetto State
Just
officers.
this year.
Just this year.
And we're only in March. Not even done with March.
We haven't even
So
hit
go
April
ahead.
1st, bro.
Go ahead.
Possession with intent to distribute 9.81 grams of cocaine. Stealing department equipment for personal gain. Wielding their personally owned firearm in public. Forgetting their department firearm in public. Unlawful sale of alcoholic liquors. First-degree assault and battery. Criminal conspiracy. Domestic violence. Money laundering. Embezzlement. Defamation. And DUI, to name a few.
Yeah. It's an orchard, man. It's an orchard problem. You're right, man. And you know what? I pushed back a little bit against you when you first came on, and that was kind of your perspective from the beginning. I was like, no, man, it's not that bad. It can't be that bad. You have been showing us, man, it is that bad. It is that bad.
And just going back to what I said at the beginning, it's this programmed obedience, this programmed loyalty to law enforcement. I'm not saying distrust law enforcement, but look at them. Do your research, do your homework, wake up. I challenge folks who perhaps fly a thin blue line flag or don one on their vehicle. Can you tell me who your police chief is?
Yeah.
Can you tell me who your sheriff is?
And is that leader doing, as we mentioned earlier, the right reaction when corruption like this comes up, setting the example and letting everybody else in that force know we don't tolerate this? It's critical. But I wanted to, you've gotten some grief from folks
Sure.
criticizing, saying that, this is anti-law enforcement and FITSNews is attacking cops. And it's the same stuff I get when I call it a dirty politician. Oh, you're attacking. No. They're screwing up and we're holding them accountable as public officials who have sworn oaths, by the way. But walk us through, there was a very illuminating exchange, and you posted it on your X account, Real Andy Fancher.
Real Andy Fancher.
On X, which is growing following, by the way. I love
We're
it.
getting there.
Walk us through this exchange, because I found it very illuminating when you showed it to me.
Sure, and to preface the exchange, I cannot do my job without good cops. All right, like I said last week, and like I will continue to say, it takes a selfless officer to see a crime within their ranks and actually do something about it. Now, I would say about every other time I come on the Weekend Review and talk about badges gone bad, I have the pleasure of making contact with another good officer. So
That's correct.
the Rolodex of good officers is growing. And it was a conversation with one of those good officers that led to, yes, this very illuminating exchange. And in fact, he was just going off the cuff. And I said, listen, can I take notes and publish this online? Because this is part of that conversation that we need to have. And I'll just read it to you exactly as he said it. There are two kinds of cops, those who hate FITSNews and those who respect it. The ones who hate it, they're usually dirty and probably shouldn't be in law enforcement. The ones who support it, they're doing what's right. They've got good morals and they believe in accountability. Nobody's perfect, but if FITSNews' reporting makes you nervous, maybe you should ask yourself why.
I love that. I love that, man. And I also love the fact you mentioned earlier, a lot of these tips, and you went down that laundry list of, again, only this year. We're barely even getting started.
And those are just the ones we know about.
Yeah. But I love the point you made that in a lot of these cases, it's citizens coming to you, but in a lot of them, it's also law enforcement that are saying, hey, wait a minute, I'm seeing something that isn't right. And those cops know that it hurts them when they're out there, when these stories get published over and over again and people are seeing bad behavior by law enforcement. Those good cops know it hurts them. When they go up to the window, when they knock on the door, their credibility gets eroded by the bad orchard.
The bad orchard can kill, but it can also cost the officer's life. It's a two-way street.
Yeah. No, you're right, man. That trust and credibility is critical, man. Andy, amazing work on this, man. And I love the balance here because, FITSNews from its beginning, from its inception, has always been supportive of funding law enforcement at the highest level as a core function of government. But I love the gear that you've brought to this thing, which is, hey, we're going to support you as a core function of government, but you better use our money, our resources wisely, and you better not abuse our trust, or else, folks, Fancher's coming for you. All right, folks, that is a wrap for another edition of Your Week in Review. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Most importantly, I want to thank those of you supporting our work through subscriptions. If you haven't already, go to FITSNews.com and subscribe. It's only $8 a month, and it empowers everything that we do here. Quick programming note. Next week will be our month in review, 11 a.m. on Friday. Live, we'll be doing the show covering all the big stories of the past month, and you better believe the Mica Miller saga will factor prominently in that broadcast. But it's at 11 a.m. on Friday. You can catch it on YouTube and X, so don't miss it. The month in review coming up next Friday.